Ladies and gentlemen, let's Gamer Telecom video. Let us discuss a couple of articles that have been floating about the internet recently. Primarily, this is focused on one by Forbes. It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek article, but quite a few viewers have pointed me in the direction of this one. The article is known as Sony's boring PS4 is winning the console wars, despite the fact that there is more exciting competition. Before you all start raging over the internet over the very thought of the matter of someone calling your PlayStation 4 boring, do remember that the article is somewhat tongue-in-cheek and does give a rather interesting view on the whole console war and how it's progressing. We're also going to be basing some of this video on VG247, one of their articles from yesterday. I believe it was yesterday. Yes, it was Thursday the 21st of August. This one is called Update from the Front Lines of the Console War. I'd recommend you Google it. It's by a lady by the name of Brenna Hillier. So I'm going to read out excerpts, primarily, as I said, focused on the Forbes one, but we'll go into the VG one in just a moment as well. I'm going to start out with the Forbes opening lines. Sony's rather boring next-generation video games console, the PlayStation 4, has sold through over 10 million units to consumers. This makes the lead of the next-generation console race, which may come as a surprise to readers. After all, the competition has much more interesting and exciting and innovative video games consoles than the PS4, and even Sony is surprised by how fast their console is been selling. By the way, in case you're curious about what the Sony is surprised part, they're referring to Shuhei Yoshida, where his comments where he's like, well, we don't really know why we're getting so many quick sales. Meanwhile, they add that the Xbox One originally launched with an exciting and innovative Kinect sensor, all for $500 US. Now Microsoft offers a much less interesting Xbox One without Kinect for $399, the same price as Sony's rather boring PS4. And the Kinect allows users to navigate the Xbox One UI, blah 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 blah. Then they poke fun at the whole Nintendo situation. Now Nintendo, of course, have been under a lot of fire when it comes to the whole naming of the Wii U. Many would agree, I'm sure you probably would as well, that the naming's unfortunate because the pad that the Wii U is bundled with, many actually attribute that pad as the Wii U. So they see the pad, they call the pad the Wii U, and they think that's a control pad for the Wii. When of course this isn't the case, and this is just like shitty marketing from Nintendo. And I've always said that I personally believe that Nintendo and Sega, to a slightly lesser extent, but definitely, well, yeah, probably about even actually, Sony and Nintendo are definitely their own worst enemies when it comes to marketing, in my personal opinion anyway. And anyway, going back to Forbes, they say that the Wii U pad allows for all sorts of interesting gameplay innovations, including second-screen gaming, asymmetric gameplay, and watching Netflix on a small screen so Dad can watch football. It's all extremely useful for kids, many of whom no longer have the capacity to use buttons properly thanks to the rapid rise of touchscreens in modern society. Last but definitely not least, expensive gamepad ensured for the Wii U was underpowered compared to the competition, making it very effective at scaring off third-party developers, which is somewhat true in my personal opinion. The PS4 does have a couple of good things going for it, the horsepower, as well as the price tag and the upcoming Project Morpheus virtual reality headset peripheral. But that's not here yet, so we can't really talk about it. At least that's what the article is. So, if you look at the brief synopsis of the article, it's poking fun at the fact that while Microsoft, while Nintendo tried these innovative ideas, I don't necessarily know how innovative you could argue Kinect is. That's just my personal opinion. I don't particularly feel it's that great. Then again, I haven't used it super amounts. I've used it briefly, so, you know, whatever. But, I don't particularly feel, I don't really like motion controls either, particularly outside of virtual reality settings. It's something I didn't really like about the original Wii either. But despite the fact that Sony didn't really do anything that amazing with the PlayStation 4, the PS4 is well designed. The user interface looks nice. The graphics are fairly impressive. It's not as powerful as a high-end PC, but it's the best what we've got in terms of consoles. The control pad, once again, feels comfortable. I don't necessarily prefer it to the Xbox One pad. I think they're quite interchangeable, actually. The Xbox 360 pad, I will say, I thought the D-pad on it was horrendous. But Microsoft did listen to a lot of feedback, and they did improve things quite substantially, at least in my opinion. And once again, the PS4 pad, despite the fact it's like, where the hell's the start and select buttons gone for the first few seconds you're using it, for the most part, it does feel quite comfortable, at least in my larger hands. Quite nice pad. So yeah, but they didn't really do anything that's like that unique and innovative. Yes, they've got Project Morpheus, but virtual reality isn't really innovation. It's been around for a while. Obviously, you've got the Rift, which we've just got a development kit on. I've tried it a little bit today. And it's pretty cool, I will say. I got a little bit motion sick, so I'm hoping I can calibrate it a little better. I was trying out Half-Life and a couple of other games, and it's really cool. I will say, I'll give my opinions on it probably tomorrow, when I've actually had a bit longer on it. I don't want to give my impressions without at least doing a little bit of due diligence first. You saw an unboxing video yesterday, if you want to check, actually today, if you want to check that out, which is basically me just not even knowing what the hell the wires were at that point. I didn't do super amounts of research on the Oculus first, because I didn't want to go in with expectations, to be totally honest. Anyway, going back to point, I kind of veered off. The problem with the PlayStation 4, at least in the opinion of its critics, is that it doesn't really do anything that's unique. It offers a great gaming experience, but that's about it. The argument, however, is what else do you really want if you're a hardcore gamer? I mean, the argument Microsoft have always had against it, and it's a very, very difficult one to counter, if you're an Xbox fan or not, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, unless you're like super invested in Microsoft's franchise, and I'm not saying their franchises are bad, I'm not saying their first-party lineup's bad, I actually think it's really good, and it's actually arguable, particularly in the first like 9 to 12 months, it's actually arguable it's better than the PS4s. I'm not saying it is, but it's very arguable, particularly if you don't have a good gaming PC. The primary issue, however, and this is something I mentioned in a video which was a kind of a response to the whole Shuhai issue, which I mentioned just earlier on, regarding why he doesn't understand how the sales are doing so well with the PlayStation 4. The fact of the matter is, people don't like paying more for what they attribute to less. Now, if you don't like Kinect, if you're not interested in Kinect, it's no longer a factor for you. So effectively, you're paying more money for it. Now, you can buy the system without Kinect. But that wasn't the case to begin with, which definitely hurt Microsoft's sales. The second issue is the PS4 is more powerful. And that's not a subjective thing. That's not something that DirectX 12 can improve on. Yes, it will maybe slightly improve the performance, particularly on CPU side of things. But the bottom line is the PlayStation 4's API is already very low level anyway, and it will continue to have updates. Therefore, Microsoft just really cannot make up for the gulf between the power of the Xbox One and the PS4. And while I'm not saying that you should base your decision on that solely, a lot of people do. And even if you want to use that as the sole metric, the bottom line is if you're buying a console and you're not sure which one to get, and you're looking at the list and you're like, well, PlayStation 4 has Infamous, well, you know what, the Xbox One has Rise. Hey, you know what, the Xbox One has Sunset Overdrive. Well, then again, the PlayStation 4 has, and you continue to do that. And for all intents and purposes, you know, you go through all the games, you're like, well, you know what, they're fairly even. So now you're going to figure out, well, really and truly, I can only afford one of these systems, so I might as well go for the one that's going to give me the third-party games that look their best. Unfortunately, that's just how a lot of people think, and a couple of people I've spoken to have pretty much told me the same thing. With that said, the Xbox One, for the most part, has done really well. Their GUI updates have been pretty continuous. They've managed a rather steady stream of titles. Their E3, their previous E3, was arguably better than Sony's. I'm not saying it was, but it's arguably it was. And I'll tell you the main reason behind that was Sony actually concentrated a little bit on TV. Microsoft managed to just pack in the games, and I will say certain titles, despite the fact that I'm not really interested in certain, say, Sunset Overdrive, other titles like, say, Fable and Halo, like, when I heard the Halo music, I was like, oh my god, I want this. So yeah, and there's a lot of PS4 owners, meanwhile, that just didn't have a PS3. But the crux of the matter is, and this is from an excerpt from VG247, this is already working in Sony's favour. You only need to hear the PS4 is outselling the Xbox One at 2-1 a few times before you think to yourself that it must have something going for it. You only need to have half of your friends to signing on to PSN rather than Xbox Live before you wonder whether investing in a Sony machine isn't the better idea. You only need Sony is the winning the console war to become one of the dialogue in order to become more true. Here's my argument to anyone, and this is outside of a quote. Don't buy a console based on what other people are doing. Buy it because you love the console. I'll give you a little bit of a story. This is going to be a quickie. Back in the day when the Saturn was first doing the rounds, I bought the Saturn on launch, and I supported the machine way into its death throes. And I loved the bloody thing, despite the fact that Sega kept on stabbing itself in the eye repeatedly with a rusty fork, with marketing, with gaming, with not releasing titles in the UK and America when it should have, despite the fact that they were popular in the, I don't know, say Japan. I didn't understand some of their marketing decisions. I stuck with them, and I even bought a Dreamcast shortly after launch. But I also enjoyed the PlayStation 1. My point being that if I'd have gone with the popular decision and got rid of my Saturn, I never would have played certain games on it. I never would have enjoyed Shining the Holy Ark. I never would have got to complete and play and enjoy Panzer Dragoon Saga, and I still own the original, which is worth a ridiculous amount of money now, by the way. I never would have got to play games like Street Fighter Alpha 2 without the butchered PlayStation 1 version, because the PS1 just didn't have the RAM for it. The problem is, a lot, however, of gamers are going to look at things such as what is, well, winning the console war. And the concern for many is that, look, Microsoft are not in an unwinnable situation right now. They're not in a situation where they're being outsold 4-1. They're not being outsold to the point where, well, if I'm a developer, do I really give a shit about releasing it on the Xbox One? It doesn't have a large install base. Is there a point? They're nowhere near to that situation yet, and they are starting to make ground. But what is the key here, in my personal opinion? I think we can all take away a couple of things from this generation of consoles. One, for the most part, gamers are not going to have a situation where they have DRM on a console. We just aren't going to be ready for it. Now, watch out for DRM when it comes to cloud services on a console. Watch out for that, because that will probably be another way they're going to try and do it. In other words, yep, we'll let you play X game as a service, and that's one way of doing DRM. Generally speaking, they're not getting away with it this generation. Microsoft got slapped quite heavily with that whole situation, as well as the whole being spied upon fiasco, which also didn't do the Xbox One any favours. Secondly, buzzwords like cloud rendering might work on some of your really hardcore fans, but those who are particularly frequenting websites such as NeoGAF, particularly websites that are like, you know, tech blogs, or you even have friends that are more technically inclined, they are going to tell you, you know, they're going to quickly do maths on the console. They're going to figure out what's in it, particularly as there's always leaks. And even if there's not a leak, even if somehow there is not a leak regarding a console, and there always is, even the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 2 and the Saturn, all of these consoles had some leaks. We didn't know all of their specs, but we knew roughly what was coming. Even if there wasn't, however, shortly after launch, there would be teardown videos. There would be people who will take out the cooling fans. They will take out, you know, the bits and pieces. They will lay them on the table, and they will start figuring out, okay, what does this processor do? Okay, this is made by Hynix. Okay, this Hynix RAM, we can Google this. Okay, that's the operating speed. Okay, it's laid out on this configuration, so that must mean it has this bus. people will figure it out, and developers as well, once their NDA is done, and you can't have a developer under NDA forever, and even if they were, something's going to leak regardless. You know, they're going to mention something in an interview. How are you finding the PlayStation 4's RAM? Well, it's okay, you know, it's about 180 gigabytes a second. You know, they might round it up slightly, but you're going to get the figures. So my point being, basically, people are going to want to look at the performance. Performance is a massive indicator because you really want to distance yourself as far as possible from the next generation. To be honest, I was amazed the original Wii did as well as it did. I really was. I liked the original Wii. I think it had some good games on it, but at the same time, I don't think it was worthy of how much success it got. I thought that it had some good ideas. I thought that it had some kind of cool games on it. It had some very cool games on it. And I thought that it should have had some success, but I don't think it should have outsold everything it did. And I think for the most part, the Wii was kind of an anomaly. If you look at the amount of software that was sold per console, it was actually quite low. It's a bit of a shame. If I had to be honest, I think that the GameCube deserved a lot more success, and I think that the GameCube should have cannibalized, well, maybe not cannibalized since it came first, but I think if any console out of the GameCube and the Wii deserved success, it should have been the GameCube. The GameCube was a fantastic system, given the fact that it was really cheap. I think it was released like £130 in the UK, which was considerably cheaper than the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox One. Okay, you can't call it the Xbox One, but the original Xbox at the time. It was really powerful. It was quite easy to program for. The main drawback with the original GameCube was the fact that the discs were tiny, which was a problem. My point being, power is always going to be a factor. So I think developers, console manufacturers, as well as consumers now are going to be a lot more careful with that. Finally, I'm hoping people now are going to start taking the console wars a little less seriously. It seems to be somewhat leveling out now, at least from what I'm reading. I don't frequent forums super amounts, but I think it's leveling out. I think there are a growing number of people who respect the PlayStation 4's titles and respect the Xbox One's titles, and they realise that, hey, you know what? It's a good system. Look, I'm a PlayStation 4 owner, but I want to get an Xbox One. But even if I hated the Xbox One, even if I thought that it sucked, even if I did not like the games, even if I thought the GUI was horrible, even if I thought that Microsoft sacrificed goats every night, I would still want the Xbox One to do reasonably well, because I would not, as a PlayStation 4 owner, feel comfortable with PS4 dominating everything, because it just doesn't do the industry any good. That's just my opinion. So if you want my honest opinion on the whole Forbes article, I think it's quite amusing that it kind of hits the nail on the head in my personal opinion. The PlayStation 4 is doing really well. It's outselling the Xbox One. It's obviously outselling the Wii U, but that's mostly because of Nintendo's failure. I mean, to be honest with you, Nintendo failed really badly with the Wii U. The name was a problem, the fact it was underpowered was a problem, the fact it was marketed completely and utterly terribly wrong. I'm pretty sure that if you've got a 3-year-old sister and you asked her just to draw with some crayons on the back of a cereal box a marketing advert for the Wii U, it probably would have done better than Nintendo's original efforts. They were really bad. Which is another problem as well, as I've mentioned, with Sega and so on. They just don't seem to do well. And as well, another fiasco which hit Nintendo was the whole YouTube copyright issue. Because you had these fans that were starting to produce games for it, and just as people were starting to think, oh, this looks cool, what happens? Nintendo starts to clamp down on it, which isn't good, because then people aren't going to produce games for it. Especially for titles like the Wii U, on the Wii U, like Mario Kart. You want to promote that stuff as much as possible. And now they're trying to work with YouTubers, do profit shares. You shouldn't do that. You should just say, hey, please, for the love of God, show my gameplay, particularly when you're the ones that are behind on the console. I mean, do you really think that watching someone else play Mario Kart is going to detract from a sale? I don't get that, but that's for another video. And I feel that Sony haven't really done anything that much for the console. Wars. They've basically just not screwed up, and this is something that I've mentioned previously in another video with my whole PS4 rant. You know, does the PlayStation 4 deserve the success, I believe was the title. And yeah, it of course sparked a few controversial moments. I'll try and remember to link it in the video description. If not, just search on the channel and I quote, "Does the PS4 deserve the hype?" Ampersand praise from gamers ampersand at the press. So it's quite a funny video in my personal opinion. I also did a rage one for the Xbox One. Also, it's like all comic. But anyway, as enough self promotion. No, nowhere near enough self promotion. What else was I gonna say? The PS4 hasn't done anything what I would consider amazingly innovative yet. They've basically just not screwed up. They've released a steady console, and that's the thing that's winning them the console race. Hopefully, and I do mean the word hopefully, we're going to be seeing, well, the same thing from them for a while, and hopefully Microsoft learn this, and they're going to do the best they can. My personal opinion, however, on the articles, I think they're kind of amusing. They do hit the nail right in the head, and they're interesting social commentary on just how and why gamers will argue over this stuff. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.